Hey, one more thing before you go. Ghouls, goblins, ghosts, and creatures. How about witches? And many more. Do they exist? On this episode, we're going to have a conversation with a man that is close to all things supernatural and paranormal, and we're going to talk about the possibility of creatures walking among us. I'm your host, Michael Hurst. Welcome to One More Thing Before You Go. My guest in this episode is James Leo York. He's a copywriter who uses evolutionary behavior to write content that resonates with different aspects of a target audience's mind. He popularized the term evolutionary marketing, especially in personal favorite content to write or commercial screenplays. When he isn't writing content, he's working as vice president of Inventors Network Kentucky, a nonprofit that educates inventors and entrepreneurs. And he has a podcast that talks about everything spooky and supernatural and paranormal and creatures and witches and so much more. It's called The 13th Floor. We're going to talk about all of that. Welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Leah, we've had several conversations on this show before, and we've always had some brilliant topics to bring about, and I'm very happy to have you back on. Thank you for being here.
Thanks. It's great to be back.
You know, it's we think we all have this innate desire to really understand the paranormal and supernatural a little bit more. You know, we always want to know: do ghosts exist? Does
Yeah.
Bigfoot exist? Are there lizard people walking around, or UFOs?
Maybe.
Yeah, and witches. Are witches real? Um,
Uh,
so yeah, I think that your podcast has been around for a little while, and it's just
yep.
like the word says. But you co-host it with two other individuals, and it's everything about the supernatural and paranormal. You want to tell us about
Yeah.
just a little bit of it?
Oh, sure. Yeah. Me and Alex and Cece, we started the 13th Floor about 5 or 6 years ago, and really, it's unique in that we talk about strange things, supernatural, occult, conspiracies, but we do so from a humorous angle, and also all of our episodes topics are 100% listener requested. So our listeners have a lot of agency over what we talk about.
And I say, think from that perspective, do you get a lot of people who are just curious about that answer, or do you get people who come on there that are more geared towards this is what I think I saw, or this is what I think I heard?
It's a pretty good mix of both. I think everybody on some level is curious about these sorts of things. I mean, there's a reason why we call death the last great mystery, and then additionally, we have a remarkably complex history, both culturally and just historically, with folklore that talks in depth about different beings, where there's a lot of overlap depending on different cultures. And it does make people wonder, are these things real that all these different civilizations seem to recognize and describe at some point or another?
Yeah, I think well, like I said in the opening, I think that we all have this innate desire to really understand the supernatural. Do angels exist? Do demons exist? We watch and I remember back in the '60s watching I Dream of Jeannie. We all wanted a genie, and I was at an age where it's like, yeah, I want a genie, or Bewitched.
Understandable.
Yeah, I remember Bewitched.
Oh, yeah.
I used to watch that as a kid as well, and they kind of made it fun and in mainstream. Like, wow, it'd be cool to have, be married to a witch or be married to a genie. But then again, we have the alternative side where, they vilified witches in Salem. I think you've had some conversations about that, haven't you?
Definitely, yeah. And there's an interesting connection. Speaking of which, regarding Salem, because on our show we've discussed the possibility of ergot, a fungus that has really unpleasant psychoactive effects. One thing that's really unique about ergot that lends credence to that theory that it's the reason for these witch sightings and experiences is most hallucinogens that people ingest, when they come out of it, they acknowledge that it is a hallucination, Whereas ergot, when someone experiences, being a werewolf or cavorting with the devil, when they come out of it, it doesn't feel like a hallucination. Their memory is so lucid of the affair that they just genuinely think it happened. It's very unusual compared to pretty much any other psychoactive substance in that regard.
Is that something that was very prevalent in that area, or how would they ingest that?
Prevalent, it's kind of it's a very common plant even now, but back then they didn't have a means of detecting it. It basically parasitizes a lot of crops, including wheat, which
Mm.
was very well. It was very important for most European cultures since time immemorial, and yeah, the Pilgrims brought it with them to the New World, and they uh, they did supplement their diet with corn and pumpkins, and that ultimately became the dominant food for a long time. But before that, they brought their wheat with them, and they brought that ergot with them too.
So you think that made people think that they may have seen a witch or some magic, or like you
Absolutely,
said, werewolves or a creature of some type?
yeah, yeah. It's unusual in the sense that there's no disconnect. There's no association of, oh,
Mm.
I was totally out of it when I was, running through the woods shirtless, screaming and trying to bite people. With ergot, it's you look back on it and it just seems like it genuinely happened what you were experiencing.
Oh, that's interesting. I've never heard that before. That's
Mhm.
actually pretty cool. But on the other hand, you've had conversations with somebody that was a witch, correct?
Absolutely, yeah, yeah. Sorcery is definitely becoming more popular, and I think there's a few reasons why. One, and you actually spoke on it, is pop culture in the mid 20th century and onward, excluding like the Satanic Panic in the 80s and early 90s, really has a very friendly and positive view of magic practice, and I think that's really colored people's perspective and gotten them more curious. And then the other reason, and we're seeing this a lot with physics, we're seeing this a lot with new age thought, is the idea that intention and thought can influence reality. That's becoming a lot more common, a lot more accepted, even in scientific realms. And as a result, that lends a lot of credence to the idea that magic can actually exist just by virtue of the fact that setting a strong intention for something can attain a desired result. So magic has kind of evolved in that respect over the past few centuries from, you know, mixing a variety of peculiar ingredients together in a cauldron to participating in a rite where you set an intention and attempt to manifest, and I do think that is the best word for it, manifest a desired result directly from intention and from mental focus.
Yeah, I agree with you in that part. I think that we all have the ability to create our own magic, and from that perspective, I think that it's the manifestation of something is very real, and that we have the opportunity to take advantage of that, connecting with the universe. I mean, I've always had the feeling that we're all connected in the universe anyway, and there's a source there that um,
Physics agrees with you now.
yeah, 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 has come around for that. Yeah, and I think I mentioned to you before we started this conversation. I just got through binge watching because it was on AMC Plus, and I'm gonna kind of let the streaming services have gotten so out of hand with cost and everything. We need to. We were thinking of reevaluating whether or not we are going to keep AMC Plus, and I saw this program on there that my sister had told me about called "A Discovery of Witches." Have you had a chance to watch that?
Not yet. Yeah, gotta check it out though.
You got to check it out. It's an amazing. What it gives us is the ability to really believe, as they put it, that creatures walk among us. We just don't know it.
Interesting.
And it obviously for the word it is the discovery of witches is that they're witches, there's demons, and you can help clarify this too because whenever they talk about it, or in some of the when they've written something about the show, they don't spell demons Demons. They spell it Daemons.
Yeah, that's actually a very interesting and kind of loaded concept. So we can kind of look at the origin of the word, and it's actually due to a big misunderstanding where the word demon comes from. So if you look at the Indo-European language tree, which is the ancestor of all the European languages as well as Hindi in India, there is a word, daimon, and it kind of means dissected or cut or two, and then fate. So what is a daemon or daimon? And really, it's kind of like a guardian angel. Ironically enough, it's a being that either through an ancestral spirit or some sort of spirit that's not was never human, watches over a person and inspires them. And it's actually where we get the word genius, and it's where the concept of muses come from. The idea that a family would have a guardian demon was a very common thing all the way down to the Romans. It was part of Babylonian myth. It was part of Sumerian myth. This idea of a internal muse, internal genius, guardian spirit, super common belief. Well, if you look at the pre Hebraic, and I may be mispronouncing that or misthinking about it, but if you look at the ancestors to the Hebrew language, the Semitic languages, there we go. If you look at the Semitic languages, they had a word called Dybbuk, and Dybbuk was an unclean or evil spirit. It was not originally a fallen angel, as it's come to be known in Christianity. It was usually either a deity worshipped by a non Jewish tradition, or it was a spirit that was regarded by in the Jewish tradition to just be a malevolent thing, something that's bad. Azazel's a great example of that, and Belial. These were not fallen angels in the Jewish tradition. These were spirits that lived in the wilderness. That if you ventured too far from the human settlement, you might end up coming across something scary. That was what a Dybbuk was. And ultimately, what happened is post Rome falling and the entry into the medieval period, the two got conflated. So Dybbuk became demon, and similarly, Daemon became demon and became a malevolent kind of concept. So it's kind of a really weird, colossal mixing up of two very, very distinct and unrelated words, which is why now people are more likely to use the word muse instead of demon because of the infernal satanic connotations. But when you see it spelled Daemon, whether that's correctly used or not, it usually conveys a more positive connotation. Whereas without the A, they're usually talking about fallen angels.
From my perspective, well, that's interesting because that cleared up something I've been trying to figure out for. I should have looked it up, but I just didn't have time because I
No,
was
no
binge
worries.
watching before I before I had to repay for a whole year, right? But yeah, it's the combination of this show. They've got witches, of course, and then they've got demons, of course, or daemons, and then they've got vampires. And there's a whole slew of other little creatures that are out there as well, but these three are the
Interesting.
dominant ones. And the vampires, they're walking around in daylight. They said this is not. I won't give the whole plot away, but basically, you see them walking around in daylight, and that
Sure.
doesn't bother them. They said, "Oh, that's humans made that up," and it's got
Yeah.
we live like normal, and they've got them praying in churches and things like that. That just shows that's just who they are. But the fight,
Interesting.
it's the whole show's basically about the fight between the three of them to hold all the power and whether or not
Uh,
they continue to keep it hidden from humans.
Interesting.
But when you look at any one of them, whether it be the Damon, or the witch or the vampire, okay, if they were sitting like you and I right now, looking across from each other, you wouldn't know. They're professors, they're cooks, there's chefs, there's drivers, there's chauffeurs, there's professors, there's doctors. I mean, they're just like us, but they're
Interesting.
yeah, but they're all hidden behind this thing. But behind the scenes, here's this. You can't see my hands doing all the mixing up, the matching. Behind the scenes, there's all this conniving of who's going to be in power of this congregation
Uh,
that was set forth, several hundred years ago. And they have time walkers, and Just it's pretty cool. It just brings on, but at
I
the
got to
same
check it
time,
out.
yeah, at the same time, it also brings up to me the possibility of wow, that presented the real possibility that we have. They call themselves creatures, by the way. That
Hmm,
we have creatures walking among us. How do you feel about that theory?
interesting. Well, I have a personal theory about vampires, and it's not that I'm like solidified believe they're real, but and I've talked a little bit about this on the podcast, but this is I've thought a lot more about it lately. Is generally speaking, a predatory species has to be, by virtue of being predatory, more intelligent than their prey species. And that also
Mhm.
means that the prey species almost never is fully cognizant or aware of the predatory species, because usually by the time they realize they exist, they've been killed. And as such, there's no intercommunication that they do exist. Well,
Mhm.
if there really was a predatory species that preyed on human beings, they would have to be smarter. They would have to be more capable of hiding themselves among human society. And if that was the case, all we would really have to go on would be innate, primitive phobias and fears. Well, we do. We have absolute innate primitive phobias and fears of things that
Yeah.
resemble or behave like humans but fall short somehow. Most of our monsters in stories dating all the way back to antiquity to modern films are usually human beings given some sort of predatory quality, whether that's fangs or claws or a prognathic jaw like a dog, um, qualities that frighten us. So there's two ways you can look at that. You can either say, well, it makes sense that we would just sort of copy and cut and paste different scary concepts and apply them to humans because humans are kind of our biggest threat. We are our worst enemy. But the other alternative theory would be that it's because we did evolve these qualities so we could avoid this predatory species that's done a very good job of remaining hidden from us. So it is totally conceivable from that perspective that there is something that hunts and feeds on people that looks like people and is smarter and faster and stronger than people. And if that's not a vampire, I don't know what is.
Oh yeah, or vampire, or a witch, or a demon,
Yeah,
or daemon. So yeah,
yeah.
it is. To me, it's an interesting concept as well. It makes you really want to look at the people that you're with. uh, Kind of test them a
Yeah,
little, right?
it's funny. There's even if you look at different traditions, what what constitutes one of those categories is sometimes a combination of another of those categories. Like in the medieval period, if a woman was impregnated by a demon, the result would be what's called a cambion. And a cambion is basically just half human, half demon, but they're basically a witch. That's what Merlin was in the Arthurian legend. He was the product of a demon and a human woman. And similarly, in Eastern European and Central European folklore, if a vampire visited their pre-existing spouse, before they passed, sometimes they would sleep with them, and they would become pregnant, and they would have a child, and that would be called a dhampir, a half vampire, and they were often regarded as kind of like a witch. In fact, some of them would go village to village to take care of vampire problems, because according to a lot of these traditions, only the offspring of a vampire, half human, half vampire, could see vampires, because vampires in the Central European tradition are more like ghosts than like
People,
Dracula.
yeah, more than or people walking around teaching people at the Princeton University or Oxford University, like these people are.
Mm,
Now, I don't want to dissuade anybody from watching this program because it's an amazing, brilliant
mm,
program. The way they've shot it, the locations they shoot it in Venice as well as London, and all over Europe, Poland. They've gone to Poland, and it's an amazing, amazing opportunity for you to kind of number one see history and at the same time enjoy the storyline. It was just an intriguing. It was written. It was based on three books that were written, and so it was only three seasons for this, and they pretty much wrapped everything up on the by the end of the third season. And everybody's going, "Oh, we can have a fourth." I would love to have a fourth season because there's a fourth book, but writer strike and everything, just in the
Oh, sure.
SAG
That can
actors,
upend some
they've
stuff.
yeah, they've canceled a bunch of stuff, and they kind of decided we're not going to give you a fourth season. But I will tell you that it pretty much wrapped up that three, those three seasons wrapped everything up. But it gave the possibility of, okay, well, what's next? That perspective.
Interesting.
But if the, it, I, I've had conversations on my podcast as well with individuals that call themselves a witch, and that practice magic and practice, spell casting and
Sure.
manifesting. They talk about, like you said earlier. Um, I have not had anybody come on the program that says there's a vampire. You haven't had that, have you?
I've not, yeah, and yeah, I would be very wary of anybody who says they're a vampire because if they're telling the truth, you're in danger, and if they're delusional, they're in danger, and so either way, it's probably not a good answer.
Double-edged sword.
Yeah, yeah. About the only vampire I'd accept being around would be somebody who just says they have porphyria. That would be more tolerable.
And help everybody understand what that is.
Oh, sure. Yeah, porphyria is a really broad. There's actually multiple variations of it. Liver disorder that causes porphyrines to build up, and that's a byproduct of the liver, and it causes symptoms that historically have been associated with vampirism. Consumption of blood can help with the symptoms. Their urine often looks like blood. Their lips kind of shrivel or swell, and it makes their teeth look longer than they should. They are usually very photosensitive, so they got to stay out of sunlight. You can kind of see why people would suspect people with porphyria were vampires, and it just so happens that it's a very recessive gene, and so it often runs in more inbred families, which would include many of the royal families all through Europe. So that was another thing, the aristocratic vampire. People noticed, like, say, isn't it odd that the count and the duke and the duchess they avoid sunlight and their teeth look sharper now, and one of them appeared to be taking blood from their doctor, and they pee purple. Like, what's going on with these people?
Yeah, that kind of big explanation, please. Come over here. Let's sit down and have a talk. That's I mean, that's interesting. I have not heard of that before until you had brought that up earlier before we started this conversation. I thought, what a
Interesting.
unique, what a unique, I won't say unique genetic problem, but it's something that you think is not as prevalent because there's not. I won't say that there's no inbreeding because I do,
Sure,
I've heard of other families that are, they have no issues whatsoever with breeding
sure.
within their bloodlines. Very, from my perspective, of what I've learned, very few. Do you think it's prevalent in today's society?
I think it was pretty rare even then. In fact, the only prevalence we're seeing now, there is such a thing as drug-induced porphyria, and a lot of drugs can
Mm.
accidentally cause porphyria in people. But it has such a broad array of symptoms that finding somebody with the more vampire adjacent ones is definitely going to be pretty rare, no matter what century you happen to be
I like that, vampire adjacent. Are you a vampire? I'm vampire adjacent.
in.
So, like, do you live in Beverly Hills? No, I live right outside of Beverly Hills. I'm Beverly Hills adjacent.
There we go.
Yeah, it works. It works. So, what kind of on your podcast, 13th Floor? I've listened to this podcast for some time now since we've known each other, and
Thanks.
but help us understand. What kind of uh, guests you have come on there? What's some of your favorite? May I ask you that?
Oh, sure. Yeah, yeah. We rarely do have guests on. Callie and Troy have been great when we're in a pinch for content because Alex and Cece have three kids. Well, two and a third on the way. And so they've been fantastic. And then Sasha Graham, the Tarot Diva, was great. And having my sorcerer pal Caleb on was also great. They're all pretty memorable, not just because we rarely do interviews, but because they brought something unique to the table. That's for sure.
So, when you bring what are some of your favorite episodes that you guys have? I know you guys do your research. Somebody will make a suggestion. You do your research. You pull up the folklore, or you pull up evidence, or anything that's written
Sure.
or shown about it. Do you have any favorites?
Um, Several, but I think one of the most memorable for me was remote viewing, just because that one we had a lot of fun recording it. It was just like the stars were aligned in the right place, and we just had a real blast, and we're cackling half the time recording, and also the demons one because CC is very afraid of stuff like that, and it was fun to just have her scared the entire hour that we were recording.
So the demon one, let's touch upon that one. Since we talked about the daemons and the
Sure,
demons, you know,
sure.
what did somebody recommend where you investigated or kind of thoroughly researched demons?
Sure. Yeah, we talked more about demons in the medieval sense of fallen angels who, were cast out of heaven for siding with Lucifer, who himself was a fallen angel. And we talked about possession and a little bit about goetia. Goetia is a form of sorcery that it's European, it's medieval, but it's this idea of conjuring, trapping, and working with demons. According to the Goetia, there are 72 demons. There's a really strict hierarchy where you have these different kings of hell and dukes of hell and counts of hell and all that. And you conjure different ones to achieve different ends. And they all have different likes and dislikes and different ways of communicating with them. And it's a very complicated matter that was just really popular among select circles in the medieval period.
Yeah, is that more along the lines of satanic worship, or is that something completely different?
It's definitely, I would call it the direct ancestor of demonolatry, that is to say, the worship of demons. But what's funny about it is most of the people who practiced Goetia were themselves staunch Christians. And the way they saw it, they were making use of evil to do good. And
Mm.
the origins of that can go all the way back to King Solomon. Presumably, I can't remember if it was the first or second temple of Jerusalem was reputedly in occult circles built by King Solomon by demons. He literally had a magic ring that had the seal of Solomon on it, and he used it to conjure and command demons to build the temple. So he made use of malevolent, unclean, evil spirits to do something that was uh, notably very positive and godly.
That's very interesting, actually. I think that the majority of time, what we think about. Do you ever watch the television series Supernatural?
Yeah, yeah. Oh, there's so many references to goetic demons and Aleister Crowley and all that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that was another one of those that I stayed with him from the beginning of it, and all the way to the conclusion of that series. I think it's 14 seasons, 13 or 14
Yeah,
seasons.
it's a big
Um,
one.
yeah, I mean, obviously, I watch a lot of TV, unfortunately, but at the same time, I'm also fascinated by, we watch everything that we can get our hands on with like that, and we in Ghost Hunters and Ghost Adventures, and they had some Tennessee boys that I can't remember what they were called now, but they had a show on there. It was a group of guys from down in Tennessee, and they called themselves Demon Hunters, and yeah, it was very interesting. And they're doing
Interesting.
They moved away from the one show, and they've created another one, and we haven't had a chance to watch the second version of their
Spinoff.
journey. Yeah. Then I watched a movie that was actually based on, and I really probably should have been more prepared and had this in front of me.
No
You may have
worries.
seen it. We had a movie that was based on a New York City police detective that was investigating demons, and actually left the police department because based on a true story, and these demons somehow affected his family, and jumped into the suspect, this individual, that allowed him to do it, and then that person then kidnapped this detective's daughter and hid her in a storage room, and
Goodness.
yeah, it was an amazing story, and based on true story. And I should look it up while we're talking, but um, it was a really, really good story because it talked about the relation with that, and he then became an expert in demon hunting. because
Trippy. That's very interesting.
yeah, he was a New York City police. He was a sergeant, and then he had a shoot off from that from the movies. He ended up doing something similar to Ghost Adventures and Ghost Hunters and all of those, and it was specific to demons. And it only made like 6 or 7 episodes, but it was an interesting journey into the demonic world. And during the movie, it showed obviously it was the movie was based on the book, on the guy's real life, but a lot of what was in the book was actually transposed into the movie. So it wasn't necessarily a documentary, but it was really autobiographical from that perspective
That is
because
very interesting.
yeah, I'll get you the name of it, so you can check it out.
Thanks.
Still available, but yeah, it really opened my eyes up to, I think have I told you when I was a kid about my incident with a demon?
No.
Ah, the next time you come on the show, we'll have to talk about that. But when I was about 12 years old, we used to live in this house that was built on Indian land and Native American land, and there had always been rumors because the land had been desecrated to build this community that there were skinwalkers and demons and everything else that were afflicting with people. So anyway, we were
Spooky.
yeah, we it was a brand new house, so that was made it bizarre, and it was an upstairs and a downstairs with a basement. So it was, well, 2 floors, basement and then one level. So we slept down in the basement. I say we because my brother and I stayed down there, and my parents lived
Sure.
upstairs. Not lived, but they slept upstairs. So I was awakened one night by noise, and I had what I saw as a full-fledged demon right in my face. I jumped out of bed, and it backed me up against the wall, and I literally can draw the picture today of exactly what it was. It had the horns and the teeth and the mouth and the eyes and dripping crap out of his mouth, and he was right up to my face. And I don't know how I got out of it, but I got out of it, and I realized I was not sleeping, and then asked to be moved upstairs promptly.
Wow. Yeah,
Yeah,
that is something. Yowza.
yeah, it was pretty
Horns
crazy.
and all.
So what I found out about the Native American portion of it is my father worked for the Gazette Telegraph, and in the Gazette Telegraph there was a reporter there that he worked with that he had a column called Injun Woody, and he was a Native American individual. And we used to go through
Sure.
POWs, not POWs, powwows and things like that when I was a kid
Hmm.
through him. I got to learn a lot about Native American and their culture, their history, their dances, their everything. Well, when I
Sure.
told him about it, he's the one that told me about the fact that white man desecrated these grounds. They used to be Native American
Right.
burial grounds, and he said that was just somebody letting you know that you weren't welcome.
Oof.
I went,
Spooky.
I could
Dang.
have could have just told me.
Yeah.
Could have
Send a
just told
letter,
me.
something. Yeah.
Yeah, it was pretty wild. There's a
That is
lot more to
nuts.
that
Yeah.
story we won't go into, but it's I'm willing to tell you about it later. But yeah, it was.
Interesting.
So I definitely believe in demons and angels. I definitely believe in fallen angels. And on one of my shows, I was talking to, and I may have told you about that or sent you the clip. We have a woman that calls herself the celebrity psychic. Her name is Laura Powers. And
Yeah.
we were having a conversation on the show about angels and fallen angels. And I was asking her what the difference was between them, what an angel, a fallen angel, and a demon was, because there are fallen angels that haven't gone all the way down to being a demon yet. That's how she explained it. And as we were
Interesting.
talking about this and we were trying to understand it, we started having major technical issues. I'm talking about she was cutting in and out, then I was cutting in and out. I mean, going away badly. So we paused, talked about it a little bit. She cleansed the area a little bit. and then went back to our interview. So in post op, as we were going through it, I had done a raw cut of everything. And Diane was what? Diane's my wife. You know that, but in the audience,
Yeah,
I think knows that.
sure.
Um, I said, "Hey, listen to this. Tell me what you think." And I came back in. I was doing something else, and she says, "Michael, come here." And she says, "You have to. Did you hear this? Did you listen to this? Did you know this was here?" And she went back and played the clip back. And while that was happening, while the stuff was going crazy, okay, we literally picked up two heavy, distinct growling segments in the background on the tape itself. So that's in the episode. You know, it's my own episode. I can't remember the name of the episode.
I remember you playing me that though, and it's very. It reminds me of Amityville, the disembodied voice at the window. It's
Oh,
definitely supernatural
yeah,
uh,
yeah.
phenomenon.
It was pretty crazy. And the Laura told me when I played it back for her, she said, "Well, that's what was causing our issue because after she kind of cleared the house, cleared the conversation, it all went away and we were able to finish talking. But she says, yeah, that was growling over your shoulder. It's like, well, gee, thanks.
Spooky.
Thanks for telling me that. I appreciate that. So yeah, I do believe in demons. I do believe in fallen angels. But at the same time, I also believe in angels. Do you believe in angels?
Yeah, yeah. I think there's. I think we live in a big world and a big universe, and there's a lot going on that we aren't aware of. I think it's even arrogant to assume that we just happen to evolve all the right senses to know everything that's going on around us.
I agree with that. I mean, some of the subject matter that you have talked about on the 13th podcast, excuse me, the 13th floor podcast. Um, do you guys talk about angels and do you talk about anything? Because there's a difference
We do.
between paranormal and supernatural. So for
Oh,
those out there listening and watching, could you help us understand the difference between what is paranormal and what is supernatural? Because we've kind of crossed
sure.
over back and forth in this conversation a little bit of both.
Yeah, yeah. It's a very nuanced difference as far as that goes, and it's probably a very heavily debated difference. But from my perspective, the chief difference between the two terms is, and it's in the names, is paranormal means beyond our understanding, beyond what we deem to be within accepted parameters for natural law, what we would call normal. So somebody who interferes with machines, they're called sliders. We have record of people doing that, but it's not supernatural. There is some kind of explanation behind it. It's just not normal. It's not standard. It doesn't fall into the categories of our understanding of the world. So that would be paranormal. Para meaning above, normal being normal. Whereas supernatural, we live in a world where our observation dictates that there are immutable laws of nature. You know that things that fall down. If you drop an apple, it's not going to just start flying up into the sky. Um, conservation of mass, conservation of energy. When something violates these immutable laws, that's supernatural. So ghosts, for example, they absolutely violate the natural law of the world. These are beings made out of energy that should have dissipated. It shouldn't exist, and yet people are observing it. So that would be the two examples I would give. If somebody's interfering with electromagnetic fields and they shouldn't be because other people don't, then that would be paranormal. Whereas something that goes completely and utterly against the immutable laws of physics that we know, that would be supernatural. So it's a pretty nuanced distinction.
So Bigfoot, where does Bigfoot lie?
Bigfoot, we don't really know yet. If Bigfoot is some giant ape, then that would be, I would argue, totally normal. But if Bigfoot is sentient, then I would argue that that would be paranormal because no other sentient hominids have existed outside of our kind of lineage.
Yeah.
And then lastly, if Bigfoot really is some sort of interdimensional being that can just teleport like some people say, well, then he's a supernatural being. So he could be
Exactly.
all three.
What about
Mm.
lizard people?
Lizard people would definitely be not supernatural, but paranormal. There's a conspiracy that they exist, and if they do, they either evolved alongside us, kind of like the whole vampire theory.
Right.
In fact, it's conceivable that lizard people and vampires are one and the same, or they're from another world entirely. But either way, they're definitely not part and parcel of what we would consider to be the natural, observable, understandable world.
From that perspective, that makes sense. Then what about angels? Since we just talked about angels and demons.
Yeah, angels would definitely be supernatural beings. They definitely transcend the laws and rules that we have here on Earth at the very least. They can do things that are, if we're to believe the literature, that completely violate the laws that human beings, by being physical, have to obey.
What about witches and warlocks?
That's more debatable. If manifestation is real and it's just about intention, then I would argue that it's paranormal. But if they're actually like, shooting fireballs from their fingertips, that would be more supernatural.
Definitely, definitely. We'll go with that. So yeah, thank you for doing that. I think that it helps everybody to have a kind of a tangible look at what the difference is between paranormal and supernatural because it exists. Either way, both theories in premises exist here on Earth, and I'm
Definitely.
sure in the universe. I mean, I believe in inevitably, especially after looking at the Webb telescope pictures that they've sent back, and that there's the immenseness within this world. There's got to be some other being, some located somewhere. I'm starting to
Agreed.
sound like Captain Kirk for some reason. I don't
It's
know
an
why.
appropriate time to, though.
But it, yeah, I think that there's got to be a reason to understand that we're not the only ones in this vast, vast, vast universe, and the Webb telescope opening the doors to what really does exist out there and seeing what exists out there. I think is
Yeah,
brings it into the probability of there's got to be something else out there. Um, Even if you look
agreed.
at some of the pictures that have come back, and you go back through what some people have drawn or painted,
Yeah,
and you kind of see a comparison and go, "Oh, that looks exactly like what the Webb telescope picked up, and we hadn't seen that before." Other
yeah.
than that,
Well, speaking of which, this one's more disturbing, unfortunately, but I mentioned Aleister Crowley earlier. Aleister Crowley's called the Beast. He's called the wickedest man who ever lived. He created a very controversial system of magic called Thelema or Thelema. And he did a lot of occult rituals, and it was all very hedonistic and very anti right hand path type stuff. It was left hand path type stuff, in other words. He actually drew a demon, and this was his depiction of, to him, an extremely malevolent being, and it looks just like an alien gray, like just like an alien gray. And this was before people started talking about alien grays. So I hope that's not the case. I hope that the aliens aren't
oh,
demonic in nature, but that's a theory that I have heard being bandied around just on the grounds that somebody notable drew aliens and said this is a demon I'm familiar with.
well, if we go back in time, I watched a lot of Ancient Aliens, and I've watched a lot of archaeology programs too, like the Expedition Unknown with Josh Gates and Expedition X with Josh Gates, and he's got two people that a scientist and a paranormal investigator that kind of work together. I don't know if you've seen those either one of those programs, but
Yeah, a
they
little.
it's interesting because a lot of what they've brought up, they go back through these archaeological sites that are ancient archaeological sites, Mayan and Aztec, and they have depictions of what appears to be alien form,
Yeah.
and statues, and now when I say pictures, I mean like it's carved out of
Stone
stone,
carvings. Yeah.
and or it's scraped into the wall or painted on the wall, kind of a deal.
Right.
And from that perspective, you kind of go, they didn't have TV, they didn't have radio, they didn't have War of the Worlds playing in their ears about the big alien invasion.
Right.
So that to me presents an evidentiary aspect of the existence of someone coming here or something coming here from another world,
Yeah.
because it's evident in what was already left and ingrained in some of these sites. Um,
Yeah. Similarly, the lizard people, they're called the Anunnaki, according to some. And if you look at ancient Mesoamerican art and ancient Babylonian and Sumerian art, they have one big thing in common, and that is anthropomorphic lizards who are carrying a mysterious bag in one of their hands.
that's interesting. That and snakes, they have snake
Yeah.
people, which would still
Yeah.
could be depicted as just kind of lizard like, which is
Yeah. No, definitely.
yeah, I find that really fascinating. If you had the opportunity to have anybody, kind of drop that in your hat to investigate a little bit further.
It's something that I definitely hope someone does request because it is a very complicated and multicultural kind of story, and it's one of those things where we see a lot of evidence for it. Nothing super concrete, nothing super modern, but there's been a lot of government files being what's it called, declassified,
Yeah,
and a lot of them lend credence to the idea that aliens have always kind of been here and they've been visiting us for a long time, and the descriptions of some of them does lend credence to the idea that there's different species, and some of them do resemble the greys and some of them do resemble anthropomorphic reptiles.
yeah. I think that's really interesting. Well, if nobody drops that in your hat, then I will. And if you,
Good deal.
when you're not,
That counts. It's going
I
in the
can't.
vase.
Oh, I'll throw that in your hat. And if you need
Nice.
any help with that, just let me know. I'll be glad to help dig into
Sounds
that with
good.
you. I think that would be a fascinating opportunity to explore. Uh, yeah, I love exploring the possibility of what exists out there, and
Yeah.
that's one of them. So anyway, um, I love this conversation, Leo. Every time I talk to you, I think we've opened new
Likewise.
doors on many things. I loved our triads episode where we talked about the
Oh,
triads.
definitely. That was a
And
good one.
it was really good. I really enjoyed that. So anybody watching or listening, I'll make a reference to it in the show notes so you can back and check it out, along with the interview with Laura Powers, the celebrity psychic, so that you can hear the growling in the demon voice. To me, that's profound. But I want to make sure everybody comes and visits you on the 13th Floor podcast, because I think if you don't,
Thanks.
you're missing out on some education. You're missing out on some brilliant uh, theories and brilliant pieces of evidence to show you that there is the possibilities that more exist than we think, and opens the doors for people. So, how can they find you?
You can find us anywhere you listen to your favorite podcast, and you can find us at www.13thfloorpodcast.com.
And that's 13th as in 13th,
That's right.
so that everybody knows how to get there. And
13th.
I'll make sure that that's in the show notes so that everybody has a nice link to get there. It's a brilliant podcast. You really should go check it out. They have these wonderful conversations that are informative. Sometimes they're funny. There's a lot of bantering. There's a little discussion. There's a little bit of everything for you. And when you walk
Thank you.
away, you're going to walk away with something that is valuable to you in one form or another. So, yeah, take a chance to do it. Um, Again, Leo, thanks. There's more things that we should talk about and need to talk about, but obviously, never
Thanks for
enough
having
time
me.
in the world. Um,
Yeah.
this is one more thing before we go. I always ask this to everybody. Do you have any words of wisdom or something you'd like to say before we go?
Your perception influences reality more than you realize.
Brilliant. That works. Love it. Well, thank you very much for being on the show. Thank you very much for
Thanks
joining
for
me here.
having
I
me.
really appreciate it. And for everyone else out there, the link to 13th Floor Podcast will be in the show notes so that you can easily attach to it. Please check it out. And all right, then before you all go, have a great day. Have a great weekend. Thank you for listening.
Thanks for listening to this episode of One More Thing Before You Go. Check out our website at beforeyougopodcast.com. You can find us as well as subscribe to the program and rate us on your favorite podcast listening platform. Thanks for listening to this episode of